This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
6 now after 11. It is time now for Ask a Rabbi. Welcome. It's your very first program.
It is.
And
Thank
you
you.
filled in for Ask a Lawyer.
I
so you're
did.
not
It's
unfamiliar.
not my first time on
No.
WPSL.
And
no,
welcome.
it's not. Thank you. So this is Ask a Rabbi, and we are both simulcasting and doing it live on the radio. So you are welcome to call in if you have any questions that you might want to pass through a rabbi's ears and hear what her answer is. So I will start out by just, you might know, I am the rabbi of Congregation Eitz Chaim. And Stuart, I'm going to ask, you probably can't see that, what questions there might be on there, but...
So you're on Facebook. Is
I'm
it
on
Facebook?
Facebook.
Okay.
We're sitting on Facebook as well, so we're going to try this and see how
Okay.
it works.
On Eitz Chaim?
No, just on me right now. We can share it to Eitz Chaim. You can do, or whatever. We'll figure all the technical
So
things out.
listen on the radio, watch on Facebook.
Right. There you go.
Got ya.
You can do all of the above, and I think it's the wonders of technology
Yeah.
that we can do all these things.
Sure.
And that's a beautiful thing. I love that we have this available to us here in St. Lucie County, and in fact throughout the world, because WPSL is connected into the greater web. And then we'll be posting it afterwards. So there's lots of opportunities to catch things on. And I see people saying hi, so that's a cool thing.
That's great.
Yeah. And since we don't necessarily have listeners the first couple of sessions, although I'm hoping that by doing the simultaneous we'll get more.
And of course, Bulldog's out there.
Always bulldog, right? And that's a good thing. So let's start out maybe with a little bit of our congregation. I'm going to start there, and then I'll talk a little bit about me, and then we'll talk a little bit about the topic that I had for today. So our congregation is Congregation Eitz Chaim, and it's just about coming up on 3 years now, not quite 3 years old yet. And we are located across from Met Stadium. We're small. We like to say that we're a place where everybody knows everybody's name. And we want to keep it that way, even though we expect that we'll grow much bigger in the coming years. We have Friday night services every Friday at 7:30, and they are extremely joyful, extremely musical. We are very lucky to have musical accompaniment by Reverend Jack Kirch, who plays the organ for us. So we are nice and lively with the music, and sometimes
So we're a Jewish congregation with a reverend.
we're a Jewish congregation with a reverend. You know, it's a wonderful gift that he gives us. He's wonderful on the music and helps make our services more beautiful. We also do Shabbat morning. We do what we call Stolen Moments, which is at 9:30. We study the portion of the week. For Jews, there is it's called a luach, a calendar, that prescribes what part of the Torah you read and also what part of the prophets you read. Prophets for each given each week. And so we talk a little bit about that for about an hour, and then services start at 10:30, Shabbat morning services. And they're typically over around 12, sometimes a little bit longer, depending on how much interaction there is during the service. And beyond that, we have Movies in Anash once a month, where we watch a movie of Jewish topics and enjoy some hot dogs and hamburgers and things like that. And we also have a monthly Havdalah. That actually harkens back to the history of our congregation. We started not as a congregation, but as something called a Chavarah. And a Chavarah is a gathering of friends. And in those days, we would meet on one Saturday a month and one Sunday a month. And the Havdalah service is the service at the end of Shabbat. And so we would do that and some singing and some learning. And the Sunday program was usually a learning program. Somebody from the community usually came in and gave us a lesson of some sort. So when situations transpired and I was no longer the rabbi of the other congregation in town, then the group that was in the Chavarah asked me to go ahead and be part of starting this congregation and be the rabbi for it, and I agreed to do that. And gosh, it's, wow, just about coming up on 3 years, as I said.
As Frank Sinatra says, Regrets, I have a few.
Well, it's been an interesting journey. We were able to hold high holiday services that very first year, and we held those in tradition. And we've been holding services ever since, Friday nights and all the holidays, and we've been full steam ahead. So that's been an amazing journey. So it's almost as if the high holidays really are our birthday in some ways.
And they're right around the corner.
And they're right around the corner. We're going to be taking reservations for this year starting this week. We'll get the reservation form up on the website. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we're also going to be having the Treasure Coast Expo on November 7th. And there's information for that on Facebook and on the website as well. So lots of exciting things coming up with our congregation. We're booming and growing. So a little bit about me. I'm the 23rd generation of rabbis. I'm the first woman rabbi in the family. And my father of blessed memory came from Hungary, and he was a rabbi here as I was growing up. That was always what I knew him as. And, of course, my mother often taught Sunday school, which was a common thing for the wife of a rabbi to do. I teach at Indian River State College, where I teach world religions. I have taught ethics and student success, and I have a PhD in education. Obviously, I have my ordination as a rabbi from the Aleph Rabbinical Program, and I am probably about 6 months out on finishing a PhD in psychology. So there's been a little bit of work in my background. My husband calls me the professional student. He's used to seeing my nose in a book. So I love to study and I love to teach. I think those are the two things that probably define it the most. And I love doing our services. I love singing. I don't do it well, but I love doing it.
You do just fine. Better than me.
Well, I always do better when there's music or somebody singing well next to me. And it's funny because I watch and see when I go off key, and I can tell by the looks coming back at me from my husband and others in the congregation. Our standard joke is, "What key did you sing that in?" All of them.
Yeah.
So, but I do love to sing, and I love to do all kinds of things. Okay, so let's get into the topic. And by the way, you're welcome to ask a question. Anything is fair game. If I won't answer it, I'll say that. If I can't answer it, I'll let you know that too. And if you stump me, then I'll get the answer and get it for you the following week.
And of course, they can get you on Facebook, but you can give us a call here, 340-1590. Call us at the studios.
That would be the preference because I can't see it.
Yeah, it's hard to.
The print is this tiny. Yeah. So if you're posting a question on Facebook, please call the radio station.
Right, that'd be great. 340-1590.
Okay, there you go. 340-1590. It's easy to remember because 1590 is WPSL. And we're digital 1590.
Yes.
And that's a great thing. So the topic that I wanted to talk about today is one that you sometimes hear about, and that is what or who is a Jew? And that's a question that I think has been part of our people for a couple thousand years. And it's not an easy one to answer. And it sometimes sounds like a dodge, but it actually depends on who you ask as much as anything else. Because it varies partially by what movement within Judaism you're talking about. So it's different we're a Reform congregation with an Aleph membership as well, we call it a renewal flair, which means that we're musical and joyful, and we really relish community. We like that community feeling, that feeling of no inner cliques and none of that stuff. So it's just we work to be together. It's family in the good way, not in an abusive way, but in a good way. And so Reform looks at who is a Jew and says if either parent is Jewish and you're raised as a Jew, then you're a Jew. And you can also obviously convert, which means it's not a race. Because you can't join a race, but the reality is that we've got one human race. And right, we're just different shades, we're different features, different hair colors, different eye colors, but we're all human. And so there is no Jewish race. It's not that your parents have to be Jewish for you to be Jewish. People do convert all the time. In fact, I will say that with the low birth rate, I actually bring more Jews into the world through conversion than by naming babies.
Mm-hmm.
So I love both, because they're both ways for people to move forward. Obviously, birth is a fantastic thing. And so that's the definition for Reform. If we go over to the Orthodox side, they say, well, you can't be 100% sure who the dad is, because that law was put in before DNA, but they said, you can't be 100% sure, but you can be sure who the mother is, because you can see the baby coming out, and you know where the mother was. So if the birth mother is Jewish, the baby's Jewish. Otherwise, you have to convert. And that worked really, really well back in the days before surrogate mothering, because surrogate mothering changed the world. Oh, lawyer, sitting next to me, because the rule is the birthing mother, which means that if a man is Jewish and his wife is Jewish, and they use a surrogate mother to raise their egg and sperm, and the surrogate mother is not Jewish, the baby is not. Now, for Reform, it would be, but for the Orthodox, it's not. It would need to be converted, because the birth mother is not Jewish. And so some of these things play into it. And so what does it mean to be Jewish? That's even perhaps a bigger question. Does it mean you have to belong to a synagogue and go to services? No, you can still be a Jew without that. And of course, the word Jewish, right? Oh, I'm not a Jew, I'm Jewish.
Ish.
Right.
Meaning just
right,
a little?
Ish. Yeah,
okay.
Right. Well, that's actually where it came from.
Okay.
It came from a routine that somebody had where they said, no, I'm not a Jew, I'm Jewish.
Okay.
And, right, so, and the word that we use to describe us has changed over the years. When a long, long time ago, many of the folks who came from Europe wanted to be called Hebrews. In fact, the Reform movement was originally the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. And that was probably a backlash against the derogatory use of the word Jew coming out of Europe, and sometimes here in the U.S. I hear it, unfortunately, being used derogatorily. And sometimes Hebrew is what it's called. In Russian, it's Ivreski, which is Hebrew. That's their word for Hebrew. Ivri being the Hebrew word for Hebrew. So who are we? Well, Jew comes from Judea, actually, from the southern kingdom. There was the kingdom of Israel. There was the kingdom of Judea. And by the 1st century of the Common Era, there was a kingdom in the middle dividing them called Samaria. So, if you were a Jew, it meant you were Judean. You were from the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom has kind of lost its identity. So we really don't have a term for them. They were Greater Israel, perhaps. They're not Israelites. Israelites are the folks who wandered in the wilderness. They were the children of Israel, the children of Jacob. Israel is Jacob's other name, the name that he gets when he wrestles with the angel and wins. Right? He prevails. And so the people then become called Israelites, or Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, the children of Jacob. And Israelis are what citizens of the current modern state of Israel is. It's a modern state. It's got a prime minister, it's got a president, it's got its Knesset, which is a parliament. They're built more on the British system because of being a British territory before independence. They're not built on the American model. So for them, the person who really runs the government is the prime minister, much like England. And they have a president because they don't have a king or queen. And that is the person who does the state events and those sorts of things. More a public figure than a governmental figure. And that's a common system inside British countries, or countries that come out of British oversight, or I guess part of the empire on which the sun never sets, right? Or at least it didn't used to, but it does now. And so are Jews Israelis? No. I do not have Israeli citizenship. If I go to Israel now, it would be as a tourist. The U.S. is one of the countries where not citizenship, but where a tourist visa is automatically granted, and I would be on that visa.
But what about the Jews and the right of return?
Well, that means that you either, if you live there for a year, the government will declare you a citizen, or you have the right to ask for it immediately. So if you're Jewish, you can ask for citizenship immediately. That's what the right of return means. But it's not just granted to Jews. It's also granted to family members of Jews, and because you wouldn't want to split a family up when they arrive. So it's a legal thing, and it has to do with what the Israeli government defines as a Jewish identity, much like India defines a Hindu identity. So I guess that's maybe a vestige also of a British system, that inside the constitutions and inside their legal structures, they define identities. And it's not a nationality, it's an identity. It's a really interesting little difference of how we define ourselves. So you and I would have Jewish identity in Israel, but we would be American citizens.
Would we? Does the Israeli government define Jewish in terms of the right of return the way we would to include Reform Jews, or do they define it more like the ultra-Orthodox in Israel that would not consider us Jewish?
They actually use an entirely different definition, probably a little bit closer to Hitler's, if you're related to a Jew. Right, because in a lot of ways, Israel wants to cast a very big net so that people don't end up not having a place to go. Right? What Israel is after is to see that there is a place for people to find refuge when they're having to run, and trying to make that as gentle and as easy as possible. And, are there hiccups in it? Of course there are. So a lot of the publicity that we hear here in the U.S. has more to do with marriage law and things like that, because there the Orthodox have a lot more say. Right? Israel doesn't have a large reform movement or a large conservative movement, not nearly like we have here in the U.S. In the U.S., Orthodox Jews only make up about 10 to 12% of Jews. So it's a very small amount. In Israel, that's what the Reform and conservative make up. It's a very small percentage. Most of the Jews in Israel are secular. Yeah, but of course, it's like being a secular Christian. The holidays are celebrated by the country, so you're secular, but you still do many of the holidays. In some cities, the buses even stop running on Shabbat. So that just, for me, when I lived there, that meant I had to pay a taxi cab to go to services. But, yeah, a jitney is actually what I used. So it was pretty cool. And so the definition of who's a Jew. Yeah, you don't have to belong to a synagogue. You don't have to believe in anything. You have to not be practicing another religion. That is to leave. And that's probably the strictest rule, is that if you exit, you can exit being Jewish. Well, my family was Jewish. Well, that doesn't make you Jewish necessarily. It does for some Orthodox. If you're born of a Jewish mother and you haven't actively engaged in something, you're still Jewish. And then becomes the question of, if you marry somebody who's not Jewish, are you actively participating in their religion? Not necessarily. So there's lots of different shades and ways that it plays out. And one of my professors, Dr. Rabbi Ron Bronner, used to say that 100 years from now, we'll figure out who's Jewish today. Because it's who gets to carry the banner as we move forward. We really don't know all the parameters. And it's sad when one Jew looks at another and says, "You're not." Yeah, that's something that I hope we can work past. It's always been a struggle. Who gets to win the hearts and minds of the Jewish people?
So is there a not Jewish enough?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. Now, there might be not Jewish enough to marry a certain family, because
Okay.
of prestige and things like that. As in, not so much not Jewish enough, but maybe not observant of certain rituals enough.
Okay.
Which, of course, in language becomes not observant enough. But it's not that, I'm observant. I just observe my holidays perhaps differently than an Orthodox Jew might. So for me, it's joyful and Shabbat to be singing with an electric organ playing next to me, and I think we're making a joyous noise unto the Lord. We're very happy. We're into our prayers. We're davening, which means an intentional prayer. We're very much into it. But an Orthodox would have a problem, some of the Orthodox, with the use of the electricity.
Okay.
Well, for me, I've been throughout childhood members of Orthodox synagogues, conservative, Reform.
Yeah.
I started when I moved to New Jersey. The only place there was an Orthodox synagogue. So my parents sent me there to Hebrew school. Then they built a synagogue near where we lived. It was conservative. And over the time, as I've traveled, wherever you find a place is where you go. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a home. Because for me, going to synagogue was always, I went on the high holy days, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I may have showed my face once or twice else during a year if something was going on. But it wasn't a place that I wanted to go or felt comfortable. Now, it was really very interesting. I always considered myself very Jewish. Now, I didn't do that part. So after the birth of my son, rabbi, not this rabbi, another rabbi from the other temple, I think 2 rabbis removed, he came to my home to do the bris. And I remember this so vividly. He walked into my house, and his mouth dropped open. He's looking around in my living room, and there's Judaica everywhere. Art, statues, menorahs, Shabbat, candle holders. And I could read his mind. What he was thinking was, this doesn't match the person I know that's a member of my congregation who I never see. What's the disconnect? And the disconnect for me, like so many Jews, was I didn't enjoy going to services. I felt Jewish, I cared, but I just didn't enjoy being there. Now, look, I've been a member of other Reform congregations too, and have not really been thrilled in terms of that part of it. I will say this congregation truly is different. For now at least, I'm the president of it, and very often I get up and I say this. This is a different place. It really is a different place. It's different because we're still small enough, even if there are 30 people there on a Friday night, where we literally do all know each other's name. If there are visitors, they're greeted. People talk to them. And when we have people who inevitably we do, in any of the age ranges, that are going through difficulties, whether it's medical or otherwise, for the most part, a good portion of the congregation knows it, and they care, and it matters. And that makes it a comfortable, welcoming place to be.
It is news time. Did you want to take a news break?
Yes, let's go ahead
We're
and do
going to
news.
stop for news. We'll be back with Ask a Rabbi here on
Tropical storm
WPSL.
early this morning is strengthening. As of 11 a.m. Eastern Time, the National Hurricane Center located Beryl just over 1,000 miles east-southeast of the Lesser Antilles, moving west at 15 miles an hour with top winds of 80 miles an hour. Additional strengthening is forecast during the next couple of days, and Beryl is expected to still be a hurricane when it reaches the Lesser Antilles late Sunday or Monday. Forecaster Mike Lusicki in the Florida Weather Center says Floridians should keep an eye on Beryl.
Still, it is a good idea to keep a track on this, even though we might be more than a week away from it impacting Florida. It's always best to be prepared as soon as possible.
There's also a system several hundred miles south of North Carolina that is expected to strengthen into a tropical depression later this weekend. The Labor Department released its June jobs report today. More jobs were added than expected. University of Central Florida economist Sean Snaith says onward and upward.
I think the labor market continues to get stronger, and I think everything we saw in today's report was consistent with that. The number of jobs, again, over 200,000 is a pretty strong performance.
213,000 to be specific. The nation's unemployment rate increased slightly from 3.8% to 4%, but Snaith said that was mostly because more people got back into the job hunt because of the strong economy. Both sides are blaming the other over St. Petersburg's canceled fireworks show. After calling off Wednesday night's display, the city blamed a company called Creative Pyrotechnics for technical problems, but the company says the weather was to blame. The company also says it offered to do the fireworks show last night, but the city refused. With news on the Florida News Network, I'm Alan Spector.
An idol is anything or anyone in life that comes before God. Am I going to believe in God or my own idols? The Jewish prophet Elijah faced over 450 prophets of Baal, the false god of rain, in the ultimate showdown. Whose God or little God would show up? It began when King Ahab turned his back on God, resulting in 3.5 years of severe drought and famine. You can read the full story in 1 Kings 17 and 18 in the Bible. Finally, through Elijah's showdown with false prophets of Baal, he challenged the people to decide, who would they follow? The one true God or the false gods of Baal? After seeing God's power, they finally got off the fence and declared their belief in the only true God. What about you? Are you wavering in your faith? Are you still undecided? Ask God for the courage to stand for the one true God in Jesus. This is Bryant Wright, speaking right from my heart.
A fatal fireworks injury at Tampa. A teenager has died after a mortar he was holding in his hand blew up. John Conrad reports it happened last night.
Tampa police tell us the boy, whose name has not been released, was trying to set off a large firework by holding the cardboard firing tube in his hand when he lit the fuse. That's when the fireworks exploded unexpectedly. The teenager suffered extensive injuries to his hands and chest cavity. He was taken to Tampa General, where he passed away shortly after midnight. I'm John Conrad.
In Northwest Florida, state troopers say they have found the pickup truck involved in a hit-and-run in Pace. According to the Pensacola News-Journal, a silver Dodge pickup hit Shirley Pitts as she walked near U.S. Highway 90 Thursday afternoon. Pitts was seriously injured. The truck drove away, but state troopers found it Thursday night. No word on whether the truck's driver has been located. Alan Spector, FNN News.
Congregation Eitz Chaim, your welcoming, inclusive, spiritual, and joyful Jewish home in Port St. Lucie. We welcome you to renew your inner Jew and join us. We are Reform Jewish with a renewal flair. We are multi-generational. We are welcoming to all. Come join us for a Friday night at 7:30 p.m. for our Kabbalat Shabbat services, or Stolen Moments on Saturday morning, where we discuss the Parsha of the week at 9:30 a.m. Shabbat morning services follow Stolen Moments, usually at around 10:30 a.m. Our address is 540 Northwest University, across from Met Stadium, and we are in Suite 102. Again, that's 540 Northwest University, Suite 102. Please join us for Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. or Shabbat morning starting at 9:30 a.m. for Stolen Moments. Congregation Eitz Chaim.
And 340-1590, the number here at WPSL. It's Ask a Rabbi. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. And we are back. And what an interesting set of commercials.
Yeah.
The world is what it is. And so embracing that would be to leave Judaism, right? To move into a different relationship with God. The Jewish relationship with God, it's mentioned throughout scriptures. And for example, excuse me, in Deuteronomy, in chapter 10, verse 12, it says, "And now, O Israel, what does God demand of you? Only this, to revere God, to walk in God's path, and to love God and serve God with all of your heart and with your soul." So it's an interesting piece. One of the things that I often say is that we're shutafim. We're volunteers, we're partners, we work with God. And Jews have never left God, and God has never left us. Are there trials and tribulations in life? Yes, there certainly are trials and tribulations in life. And, we wouldn't learn things without them, without the trials and the tribulations. I'll share a story that I was working once with the mother with her daughter, and I was working with the mom. And she said to me in our discussion that she prays every day that her daughter have a good day. And, I thought for a moment, and that sounds really good, until you realize that in order to guarantee a good day for somebody means you've got to control the universe. That's a ton of work because bad things are going to happen. Right? There are hurricanes, there are earthquakes. They're not punishments. They're the system. That's the planet we live on. That's the universe we live in. It's not, it's not a punishment unless we make it that. Okay? So I looked at her and I said, might you consider praying that your daughter have the wisdom and the strength and the courage to face the day, no matter what it is? And I could just almost see this weight coming off of her, because that's a lot easier. It's still hard. Mm-hmm. It's very, very hard to teach our children to have the wisdom and the skills and everything they need, right? The coping to handle what comes. But that's certainly easier than trying to control the entire universe to guarantee a good day, right? And good is a judgment, right? And not everything in life is good, right? When they made the incense for the temple, one of the ingredients was a foul-smelling ingredient because it enhanced the overall incense. And so you don't always have to be beautiful to make something beautiful. There's lots of beautiful lessons that we've got in that. And it's about moving ourselves in the relationship with God forward. So what are we partners to do? We're partners to help make the world a better place, to show that love, to caretake, right? The beginning of the book of Genesis, which is often said, you are master of the world. No, we are shepherds of the world. And the shepherd doesn't, force the sheep to do things, well, maybe to gather for food or, for safety, but mostly what a shepherd does is watch out for the wolves and try to keep them at bay and, provide, make sure there's enough food, make sure the flock moves when they need to, with the help of dogs, I guess. And so we're not alone in this venture, right? And it's all of us taking care of the planet and the world. In fact, the second verse of the Shema, which is the prayer that Jews tend to say every morning when they get up a couple of times during services, and it's supposed to be the last prayer before going to bed. And the middle, in the services, it's interesting. We usually say the first paragraph, which is, you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might or moreness. And it goes on and talks about putting mezuzahs on the doors. Mezuzah actually is doorpost, but putting these words on the doorpost of your house. And then we end with a reminder that God brought us out of Egypt. And a lot of people don't read that middle paragraph. That middle paragraph is important because it says, if you take care of the world, if you really do love God and caretake this wonderful planet that we've been given, then the rains will come in the right time, the crops will come forward. And people looked at that and they said, oh, well, that's a threat. No, that's not a threat. That's Animal Husbandry and Farm Instructions 101. It's how to take care of the planet. If you really do take care of it, then the rains are going to come when they're supposed to come. And, okay. So those are some things we do, and I understand that we have a question. We'll go ahead and pick this back up after our question from Bubby in Boca Raton. Hi, Bubby.
Hi, Rabbi.
How are you?
I'm sure my son will tell you who I am.
I think I know.
But I have a question. I'm listening to you, and it's very, very interesting. And this really doesn't have much to do with that, but this just came up. My daughter's ex-husband is getting married next month, also to a Jewish woman. She just said to me, doesn't he have to get a get before he gets married again?
Yeah, that should happen.
He does.
Yeah, it's it's a little bit. I require it when I'm a rabbi. In fact, I'll share a funny little story about that. When I first moved to Tucson, in the beginning of being the rabbi there, I actually commuted between Ohio and Tucson back and forth. And one of the first couples to come to me to ask to be married had an ex-wife whom he had not given a get to in Cleveland, which was an hour north of where I lived in Ohio. I lived in Canton, North Canton, actually. And I looked at him and I said, so you need to give your ex a get. And since he really loved the woman he was marrying, he said, of course, he would do it because it was a condition from me. But so we executed the get in Tucson, and I then carried it as his representative, and we reconvened a bet din in Cleveland and delivered the get to his ex-wife. So, it should happen.
Yeah, but if it doesn't, does that mean he is not married in the Jewish religion?
Some rabbis accept the secular divorce as a form of a get. So that's where, it sounds like a hedge always, but
yeah.
It depends on who you're talking to and who's doing the marriage. And
well, I guess she will remind him of that, and I guess it's up to him to do, I don't know if he was aware of it, that, he should get a get before he gets married. But
he
I guess
should.
then the rest is up to him, as far as whatever he wants to do.
Right, and I'm gonna put a stake in there for woman's lib, if you will. I know that in Israel, certainly men give a get. Mm-hmm. We have records in Egypt, in the Geniza, which is where they store documents, and there is a get from a woman to her husband.
Uh-huh.
So actually, one of the things that I do, I facilitated a divorce also in Tucson, and there I had both the husband and the wife give each other a get as part of the divorce.
Oh, okay.
And so she might want to consider doing that, and
Yeah.
I'd be more than willing to talk with her about what that entails. It's not that difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, she's not planning on getting married.
I understand. So she might want to ask him, but again,
yeah. She can tell him and see what he says.
Right. It's legally more important for the wife to have the get than it is for the husband to give one.
Uh-huh.
Right. Because in scriptural times, men were allowed to take more than one wife. And so if you go all that way back, then it's not as big a deal for the guy as it is for the gal.
Uh-huh.
If she's going to remarry, there is a group of women in Israel that are called agunot. They're chained. That means chained woman. It's somebody who cannot legally marry in Israel because they have not received the get from their husband.
Right.
And that is a big issue.
Yeah.
And I actually put clauses into the ketubah, the wedding contract, that says if you are going to get a divorce, then it is automatic, so that the woman is not trapped.
Yeah.
So there's clauses, and there's a couple of different groups different movements have different phrases that they use for that. But that was one of the things that was very important to Rabbi Zalman Schechter Shalomi, that when we do a wedding, we not make the wife captive.
Uh-huh.
And so, so
Very
it's
interesting. Good
yeah.
to know.
Yeah, but it's going to depend. Because in America we only have one wife, one husband at a time.
You're right.
I require a get, and from both if they're divorced, because
I wasn't sure of that. I thought it was really up to the one Like if she was the one getting married, she would need it. But being that he's the one getting married,
he should do it. He should. And part of the reason for that is that the get helps a spiritual separation. It really does help bring closure to the marriage that is no more.
Yeah.
Right? Because
one of the... All right, I really thank you very much, and I appreciate your time, and good luck to you.
Okay, well, my pleasure. Thank you so much for being my very first caller, Bubby.
Okay.
And I'll have to call you Bubby from now on. Shabbat shalom. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'd just like to mention to you, you have a caller on your live feed. Not a caller, are you? Person watching your live feed who just said hello from Rio de Janeiro.
Yes, I see that, Andre Senna from Rio de Janeiro.
Wow.
So you're international.
So there we go. Well, WPSL Digital 1590 is international thanks to things like Echo and all those different places that were carried. So it's a beautiful thing. And so I'm going to go back to one of the points that with Bubby, which is that when you have a marriage, one of the things that I counsel couples on before I am willing to do the ceremony or the ritual, because it's actually a ritual, it changes something, it births something. What it births is the couple. Because coming into a marriage, you've got two partners and the marriage. There's really three entities in a marriage. People tend to think that there's two. There's not. There's three. And you need to be able to take care of all three entities. They all need to be healthy. They all need to be vibrant. They all need to be respected and cared for. And if they're not, then it's not going to last. The marriage will falter. And it may falter for other reasons, but certainly it will falter if the marriage itself is not respected, the couple and each of the individuals in the marriage. And it doesn't matter who, how, or what is happening in that. So that's one of the things I like to spend a lot of time working with couples on. It's understanding that, and understanding that the way to keep all three of those healthy is through communication, healthy, open communication. But that's into marriage counseling. That's a whole other subject, and I'm sure that I will do hours upon hours on that subject.
Yeah, I was thinking that could be a whole show.
That could be a whole show very easily. So back to our subject of who or what is a Jew, because that's really where we started. And so some Jews come to services. Some Jews don't. It's not even required that you believe in God. There's no faith or creed requirement that you have to accept in order to be Jewish, that's always kind of mind-boggling to people. I think that most Jews are believers in God, but I know some that aren't. I know some that call themselves atheists. I have a running discussion with a friend of mine, and she might even be listening on Facebook. I don't know. But she will tell you that she's an atheist, but she believes in love and she believes in things spiritual. And I said to her, and we've had this discussion many times, just as we've had some of ours, that the name of her God is love. Right? And so if where the prayer says God, if she just says, blessed are you, love, right? Because that's really what that's the aspect of God.
But she still believes in something.
She believes in something, and that something is what most of us would call God. All right. Judaism says you can't know God. We don't really know what God is. We know some things that God isn't, but we don't really know what God is. Other than God gives us a sense of connection. God gives us a reason to find meaning in life, to move forward. Does that mean that when I'm depressed, there is no God? No, it just means we are turning away. Judaism says God is always there. We are the ones who turn away from God. And Nachman said, you are never so far that you can't turn around and say, hello, God, which is beautiful. But there's nowhere on earth where there is not God. There is no place without God. And I think if you stop for a moment and you just allow yourself to feel that connection and that force, then but obviously what I'm talking about here is my own sense. So Judaism is about seeking God. And I got a tremendous insight from that, actually, with one of my B'nai Mitzvah. We were working with the story of Joseph in Egypt, and it was the dream it's before the dream sequence. It's when he's talking with his brothers, and he wants to put them at ease. As much as he was kind of this, he's playing a game with them because he's hiding who he is. He's behind a mask and makeup, so they have no idea. And he's speaking Egyptian to a translator who's translating into Hebrew that he's understanding. It's a funny game that he's playing. But at one point, he says to them, I am Yireh Adonai. And Yireh Adonai is very often translated as to a God-fearer. And I thought, that's not exactly going to put somebody at ease. That really is not a comforting thing. And yireh is also the verb to seek, to see. And I went, aha, that's really what he's telling them. He's telling them that he is a God seeker. Right? And so somebody who's looking for God is engaged in that process. They're looking to make themselves better. They're looking to make the world better. That would put somebody at ease. If I said to somebody, I'm a God seeker, that's saying, I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything, but I'm looking and I'm open. I'm open to the experience. I'm open to what the universe will reveal, because hopefully from those things I will get some insight into who and what God is. And maybe if I'm really, really lucky, I'll get one of those little tiny moments where I think I felt it. And, easy for me to say. Judaism says that those moments are very real, and they happen sometimes when we don't expect it. Sometimes we spend hours, days, months, even years getting ready and working to have it. And it is about the seeking. It's about the looking. That's how we define holiness. Because when you're actively seeking God, then you're looking to make your life better, make the world better, treat people with respect. One of my other mentors, Rabbi Daniel Siegel, says that when we often talk to God, that's called prayer. And sometimes it's called screaming and yelling, but it's a relationship with God. It's to God. And when God responds to us, and we're not always sure, at least I'm not always sure if it's not ego, but we can tell that it's God when we see God's light in everybody. And so we have a caller, Carlos.
Hello.
Hi, Carlos. Welcome.
I have a question for you. I was watching a TV show the other day, and I got thrown off whack. I know that Sammy Davis Jr. and Rod Carew became Jewish. They became Hebrew. And they're both African Americans. So I want to know: is Judaism a religion or is it a race? And this is the question why I want to ask. I was watching that TV, with Who Am I? That TV show Who Am I, where they take your saliva and they find your DNA and all that.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Okay. There's a basketball player named Lobo. She used to play for the New York Liberty, and she was confused because her parents were both from Mexico, and she wanted to know where her heritage. So she took a swab, and she was 94% European and 6% Jewish. That threw me out of whack. How can a religion? So if I was to get swabbed, would they see how much Catholic I'm in? That's why I'm lost. Is Judaism a religion or is it a race? I'm going to hang up just to listen to you because I'm working.
Okay, no problem, Carlos. So thank you for the question. The question is, if DNA calls part of your DNA Jewish, what does that mean? Well, first of all, they are using it to say that you have DNA markers that come from people who professed and who are openly Jewish. So yes, it's more a religion, it's a people, it's not a race. You're right, Sammy Davis Jr., Jewish. We've got a couple of members in our congregation that are African American. It's anybody's welcome. It is not a race. Hitler defined it as a race, and usually when they say something like 6% Jewish, what you might want to check that report and see if it says Ashkenazi Jewish, because that is a particular set of DNA, and it's usually used to screen for for inherited conditions and problems, potential problems, like the BRCA gene, spina bifida, things like that, that came into the Jewish people, I'm going to say people here, because of being restricted inside the ghettos and times like that. So the gene pool got really narrow. And the breeding, if you will, the intermarriage, not intermarriage, it's not the right word, but the bloodlines became a little bit too close. And so some of the problem genes had a chance to take root. So if you come from an Ashkenazic Jewish, usually it's Ashkenazic when they say Jewish, they mean that. They mean Eastern European. And so you need to find out if that's what they mean. I'd have to look at the specific report to be sure. But yes, Judaism, I would say, is much more a religion, but certainly a peoplehood, because you don't have to be religious to be Jewish. It's an identity.
Could I interject with a question?
Sure.
Because this has come up many, many times.
Sure.
And I know we're running short on time. When people say to me, well, what are you? I'm Jewish. No, I don't mean that. I mean, like, where did your family come from? Oh, Poland. Oh, so you're Polish. No, I'm not Polish. I'm Jewish.
That's because in that part of the world, Jew was a separate identity. We were considered a homeless people at that time.
But there are Polish Jews, German Jews,
right.
all of Europe.
Right. So we have hybrid identities today, and we recognize that. Much more hybrid than we ever were. In Russia, they still, you're either, they say if you're Russian, what they really mean is Russian Orthodox. And if you're Jewish, you're not Russian Orthodox, so you're not Russian. It's this shortening that we do with language. It's that same kind of thing that I talked about earlier about not being observant enough. So some of the things that we get into, I would say it's an identity. We have a Jewish identity. And there's a religious component, there's a cultural component. There's many different components. And because identities are fluid and they are hybrid, right? So I'm an American Jew. And I consider my Americanness very important. I served in the military. I took that responsibility very seriously. I am an American and I am Jewish. And, am I Jewish, American, American, Jewish? It depends on the day and the moment, right? And what's going on. So, I think that identities are really important. They are a big piece of who and what we are, and they help give us meaning and significance and satisfy many of our needs. We might talk a little bit more about that next week.
I find that the identity is very interesting because we are all the same. I mean, it's why must we find a label?
Because we are people who seek differences. Anytime you have three people, they're going to try to find which one is out. Right, which one is different from the others?
So that's human nature?
It's a human nature. It's a selection, and we're visual too. So lots of things are visual. Yeah, I'm wearing a kippah. I'm clearly, and people will look at that and they'll say, oh, are you Jewish? Or are you a rabbi sometimes? And so, we are interesting. And we'll take a look at that more next week.
We are in the last minute of the show. Tell us more about your location and services.
Right. Congregation Eitz Chaim in Port St. Lucie. We're right across from Met Stadium, 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. Friday night services at 7:30 p.m. Stolen Moments in the morning at 9:30. Thank you so much for listening.
And, of course, you'll be back next Friday right after Ask a Lawyer.
Absolutely.
With Stuart Address.
You can ask a lawyer, and then if you don't get the answer there, you can ask a rabbi.
And maybe
at
we'll hold him over again. So
I think that's great. I think it's wonderful that he stayed here and participated. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Stuart.
You're very welcome.
You're listening to WPSL, Port St. Lucie.